Session 3 is bringing peace and reconciliation. Again, kind of looking under the surface at some issues and historical processes, rather than the kind of very necessary practical, workings of how we might do that, given the many intractable problems that we are faced with in the world. So we've already identified kind of problems which are there largely in the mind. Interesting to see that although at the formation of the United Nations, the kind of any idea of spirituality was excluded, right, because of mainly the dominance of Soviet Union and China, big communist nations, then that was not possible. But even you see in the preamble to the Constitution for UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, it says there, since wars began in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. So, in unificationism, in this understanding, we have a word that we call restoration. Restoration, as you can sense, means putting things right, essentially. And that may have equivalents in different religious traditions, but this is the word which we use to show and reveal certain principles which are there to make this restoration possible. So what is restoration? Well, restoration it's using, really, the opportunity to put right past mistakes where a similar situation arises, because it will do. If there was some mistake in the past and it's unresolved, then other circumstances will arise where they can be looked at as opportunities to do things differently, if you like. So where, in the past one was giving into certain temptations, if you give into those same temptations, it'll only continue a destructive pattern, and we want to avoid that. So it is necessary to make a very conscious decision not to repeat those problems. And when you follow your conscience, rather than repeating tendencies that come from the fallen nature, as we described it, then we have this opportunity for restoration. And you're breaking a certain cycle of abuse or wrongdoing, and you're breaking that pattern of fallen history. As I said, those aspects of fallen nature are like tendencies. So it means it's very easy to slip into for people. It's like swimming downstream. But if you want to do things differently, you have to do the difficult thing, which is going upstream, right? You have to swim in the opposite direction. So it's very easy. People get, as we see, drawn into cycles of violence and feel justified to do that. So how to break that is really key. And until restoration on a particular level is accomplished and realized, you can be sure that the same problems will occur. That goes with the territory, really. So how do we change the nature of things? If imagine you have a certain position or status, it could be your health, for example, very practically speaking, or it could be maybe you have a good relationship with a friend, and then you lie to that friend, then you've lost your something's gone from that relationship when you are found out as having told a lie, something which upset the person. So those are small examples, but if we have a current reality which is from losing an original position or status, we have to make a journey back. So this is being restored. Our reality is being turned back into that original position or status or standing. And, for that, we have to pay some price, essentially. Something has to be done. Something has to be offered, and it has to be a conscious effort to restore what was lost. It needs to go in a kind of opposite direction as well, a kind of reverse way to how it came about. And you're taking responsibility to correct any misconduct, even on your own part. And we have to recognize that. And often that's a tough thing in any kind of restoration situation, is coming to realize what mistakes I made in the past and how I can overcome those. So obviously, it's clear if you're unwell, if you've lost your good health, you need to diagnose the problem. You need to find a cure which is related to that problem, but sending you in the opposite direction, right? Back to reclaim your lost health. In religion, it's very interesting to see that there's a common tradition, and it's spelt out more clearly in Father Moon's teaching, because his mind was to analyze and to be able to discern certain principles at work. Because once you can do that, then you can utilize those principles for yourself and for other situations. So there are essentially two steps in this restoration process. One is reconciling with God and higher values. We saw how important those were in our original lecture. So this might be, when we look at religion as a kind of means to an end, to be a restorative vehicle, some people describe it as. You need to study scripture, to seek insights, to engage in prayer and meditation with a lot of self-reflection is very helpful. So you're stimulating and awakening the conscience. It's being fed by good sources. And it might involve some kind of confession or opening up to somebody that you can trust. And in this process, restoring a love relationship with your Creator, with God. People have chosen different paths. Some choose a path of celibacy, going without any sexual relationships or marriage. Some choose kind of poverty and obedience, the three classic areas of a monk or nun's life. Their vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. But somewhere that also doesn't lead, and this relates to Costa's point really, it's very helpful. Even people making those sacrifices might be paying a price for other people. Mm-hmm. But it's not an end yet, because if everybody followed that path, humanity would die out. We wouldn't multiply. So it's obviously not saying do this and don't do anything else, but just I feel I should make this kind of offering. I should make this kind of total devotion of my life to put things right in my life first. So, I can respect people who choose to do that, and have had wonderful conversations with monks and nuns who are some of the best people. If they did have children, they'd probably be some of the best children. This was my conclusion, right? Yeah. It's ironic. And Father Moon once said he wanted, and he never could realize in his lifetime, except for individuals, he wanted to get all the monks together and bless them in marriage with all the nuns.
That's so nice.
But he meant that in such a loving way, right? Really, genuinely loving way. But recognizing the quality of those people, actually. Who better,
Who better than...
Because tragically, no children come from their offspring. So, anyway. This we often call the vertical relationship, restoring this vertical relationship, and that's quite commonly used in different fields of religion, because you're centering on God's word or higher values, this idea of higher or above, even though physically it's not, right? It's still kind of perceived that way. So self-reflection, awakening the conscience in this way. But that's not all. We also need to do horizontal restoration, and that's establishing a proper order in relationships with other people. So these two things are necessary, and for progress, we need success in both of these areas to move closer to the goal of peace. So we need to restore the vertical relationship and improve and better the horizontal relationship. This set me thinking. I mean, between the time when I last gave this lecture and now, I was thinking about this aspect of the golden rule. You've come across that, I'm sure, right? Many books refer to this and many traditions refer to this. And I thought, well, let's do one of those interfaith searches on the golden rule. So here I don't think we've got any Zoroastrians with us, have we? Any Parsis? No? But in that literature, you'll see that nature only is good when it shall not do unto another whatever is not good for its own self. It's a version of the so-called golden rule. Here's one from Hinduism. This is the sum of duty. Do naught to others that which, if done to thee, would cause pain. Very similar, isn't it? Here's from Confucianism. Never do unto others what you would not like them to do unto you. Put in the negative, maybe that says something about its kind of rather humble approach, not wanting to dictate to anybody in that way, but just naturally find a path. In Christianity, you have in a positive, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So two ways round. It's interesting, isn't it? There are more. This is from Buddhism. Hurt not others with that which pains yourself. And in Islam, we have no one of you is a believer until he desires for his brothers what he desires for himself. Amazing. And the Baha'i religion, a very beautiful source. Blessed is he who prefers his brother before himself. That kind of idea. One more. Space for one more there. Let's try Judaism. What is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow man. That is the entire law. All the rest is commentary. Right? This was Rabbi Hillel in the 1st century. So, yes, Jews so concerned with laws, 630-odd laws in the Old Testament, and books of commentary explaining those laws and putting them into context and examples and etc. But in the end, he said, this is it. Just all the rest is commentary. What is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow man. Interesting, isn't it? So a fruitful search from my point of view. When you look at Jesus' central teaching, which has Jewish origins, it's along this line. Sorry, this is just because of overheating of the light. Don't worry, it's just getting too hot. Must be something I said. I don't know. He was put on the spot by the keepers of the law, the Pharisees, to say what was the greatest law in the whole Torah, the books that we call the Old Testament in the Christian tradition. So 630 odd laws. But so they felt, oh, we've got you now, because how can you pick out one, right? But he had no difficulty. He obviously knew this inside out. And he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind, or all your strength, is sometimes translated. So these are words not new to Jesus himself. He's quoting the scripture of his day, right? The Torah, the Deuteronomy, which itself is interesting because he's doing what he was asked to do. What's the greatest law? It's words that are spoken almost every day in the Jewish community or Jewish household. But then he wasn't satisfied with that. He said, okay, you asked for one, but you're going to get two. Right? So the second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. And again, words not new to him. He was delving back into Leviticus, book of laws, so many details there about washing and cleaning and all kinds of things, and cooking. And it's a little harder to find this. You have to search a bit, but there it is. Love your neighbor as yourself. So he was putting these two together. And what are those two aspects? The first is the vertical aspect, right? And the second is, with your neighbor. And you'll find that in other traditions. Like I say, the wording is a more modern way is to isolate it as principles and bullet points, this kind of thing, right? But that's almost like a teaching method. But you'll find it in Islam as well. I love this quotation from the second surah there. And be steadfast in prayer, which is your first vertical aspect, and regular in charity, which is the, more horizontal. And whatever good you send forth for your souls before you, you shall find it with Allah. So, it's just doing good yourself. Any reward will come. You don't have to worry about that, right? Someone knows what you're doing, right? So be steadfast in prayer and regular in charity. So that confirms this kind of idea is necessary, and it's spelt out in this way because both of these aspects are essential for restoration and for peacemaking efforts. Now, if I can be allowed to go back to that biblical story, because Father Moon drew so much out of this with his own kind of revelation and reason, I'm taking that liberty. But if we go back to that Adam and Eve story, it's like a parent's problem, or problem in the parent's generation, you can say. We've identified here the view that it's illicit love, or it's inherited fallen nature through that, which gets passed on. After all, this is sometimes referred to as original sin. So what can be passed on through the generations? Well, the kind of wrong practice or immature practice of love can be passed on, and a fallen nature can be passed on, because it's also partly learnt and inherited that way, but it's also kind of in the blood. This is the way we do things. This is the way we react. This is our first instinct. So this parent's problem gets visited in the biblical story on the next generation, interestingly, and that's where we have two sons, Cain the elder one and Abel the younger one, and it ends up with Cain murdering his brother Abel. So in this first family, there's already the first murder in the second generation. It's a very tragic circumstance there. So with a myth or story or actuality or whatever, however we interpret that, there are very interesting lessons that Father Moon derives from this, and I want to spend a little time just to elucidate that, if that's okay. Then in the story, which forms a kind of archetype for conflict, or what we see in conflict. I mean, this is the beginning. All war is brother against brother, essentially, and it's mostly men, right? So it's brother against brother. We see that in this, the way it's put in this story is that these two sons, Cain and Abel, are asked to make an offering to God, and they both do that. But Abel, the younger son's offering, is accepted, but Cain's offering is not accepted. So he's put in a position to deal with a lot of jealousy, resentment, things which were there on the part of the archangel in the story of Adam and Eve. So certain things are resurfacing in this next generation, including the feelings and the kind of position for this elder son Cain. But if we look at this, and I've always thought this is, from my point of view, it's an amazing bit of psychology here. This is God speaking to Cain, giving a little, I don't say warning, it's a kind of fatherly advice, really. It says there, if you do what is right, will you not be accepted? Wow. Right? In other words, I want you to be accepted. I want you to do what's right, but you have to do what's right in life, right? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It's like ready to spring. It's looking for an opportunity to get you. Its desire is for you, but you must master it. In other words, you must say, okay, I have these feelings, but I'm going to get the better of those feelings. I'm not going to give in to those feelings. I'm going to say it stops here. And in my parents' generation, maybe these things came up and it destroyed that generation of the family and set us off on a bad foot. But I'm going to do things differently. This is restoration, if he could think that way. this is restoration. So it's interesting that it, more than just telling a story, it sheds light on these kind of inner workings. In a short space of time, it's very profound, actually. So if we take the kind of history from then on, and even somewhere this is the process that's going on where there is conflict, it's actually a means, a desperate last attempt means to divide good from evil, where there's a kind of mixture going on, sometimes on both sides, right? But it has to be kind of clarified. So we'll see this process, and it's there in religious traditions, particularly in kind of offerings. We look down on that, and people dismiss biblical tradition because, you see people in the early books there making offerings of animals. How terrible, right? Well, we don't do that today, but it had a meaning. It had a purpose, actually. And it was related to this. Symbolically, it was the person making this division in themselves, where they had committed some mistake, and they want to separate out the good and offer that up and have the evil kind of drained of evil blood and come underneath the good side, as it were. So this is what's going on in that kind of situation. But it needs to go on as history progresses, less in terms of an external object, but more in my own heart. My heart has to go through this division process. So where you have a mixture of evil and good, which is like our first ancestors after the fall, where you have this these two minds in one person, God can't deal with that, and actually it's a hindrance to your progress. So they need to be separated out. That means into relative good or relative evil. And this was done, interestingly, by following this story in the next generation. So Cain is in the position of being relatively evil, and Abel in the position of being relatively good. They both had fallen nature, right? But Abel is recognized for his righteousness, and his offering when he makes it is acceptable to God. So it's in a way saying there's enough good there that his heart can be accepted. But Cain, no, it's like go back and try again, or think again, or maybe do it differently, or maybe you're not sincere, or you're not really serious, or maybe you've had a good few run-ins with your brother already, right? And perhaps you need to sort that out first, right? Before you think of doing this. So in this process, this separation process, relative good needs to be lifted up. Biblical language is using words like exalted or lifted up. It has to be kind of recognized and encouraged. But the evil side is not to be done away with or cast out or destroyed. No, rather it has to come underneath the good side, so that the relative evil side must come through the good side back to that purpose of goodness and be united. So they can be united centering on that purpose of goodness and make a good foundation like we had before. Are you with me? Yeah. See how it ties in? So what was happening between these brothers? Well, we can say, in light of what we talked about just a few minutes ago, then we see that Abel is the one to be proven faithful and righteousness, so he gets that kind of approval. This is making that vertical foundation that we talked about, right? This is that first aspect. Then Cain has to conquer the fallen nature in himself. You must master it. These feelings of anger, jealousy, resentment, whatever, you have to get the better of those because they're in you. And if you get the better of those, they'll be like out of your family for the rest of time. That's the kind of implication. So it's like the American business phrase, people have on their desk. The buck stops here, right? Right? This is a little bit, what's going on in biblical terms, right? It's the opportunity to say that, the buck stops here. Or, as tragically happens, Cain gives into those feelings, it just multiplies the problem. So this is the beginning of this kind of conflict situation. So Cain is there to make the horizontal foundation through humbling himself and coming through his brother. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's think what should have happened. Abel, being humble, is accepted by God. His offering is accepted. But he should forgive, and he should be very tolerant in the face even of maybe some harsh words or some bad language from his brother. He shouldn't be too bothered by that. He should think, well, hey, I see he's upset, but let's try and help him. And he should serve his brother so that he can melt that resentment. Even though it's a hard job for a younger brother to do for an elder brother, it's necessary. So if he has that perspective and has made that vertical foundation, he should have enough heart to do that, right? Cain then has to overcome his resentment and his feelings of being rejected, which you could say is justifiable resentment. He's put in a position to feel those things, and until he makes changes in himself, he's going to be stuck with that. But he needs to recognize his brother's value. That means maybe going to his younger brother and saying, could you tell me why yours was accepted and mine wasn't? Is there something I've missed out on, or I don't know, or should be doing differently? It takes some humility, doesn't it, right? But that would be the key to his solving this problem, actually. And his brother should respond willingly and happily and helping. Hey, come, I'll show you, or let's do it together, or, something like that. So he should rejoice in his brother's success. It's something that often with fallen nature we don't do. We're happy when a person we perceive as a rival or an enemy has a downfall, but we want, we should be encouraging people when they do well, right? And Cain should move on from hatred and be ready to reconcile. So as the story unfolds, we get this archetype of conflict. Cain was consumed with resentment over this perceived injustice. It was very much from his perspective, right? That's why I say perceived. He didn't love his brother from God's standpoint. He didn't, think, how much do you love my brother, or what is it about his offering that you love? And he's unable to control his anger, so he ends up murdering his brother, which is horrific, right? Horrific. And Abel is loved by God, but he can't win his brother's heart, right? And take away his resentment. And he needs to find a way to do that. He had God's blessing, but maybe he wouldn't really share it or help his brother. This is where we start to see faults which lie often on the side even of religious people. They tend to be a little bit self-righteous, right? And think, God is with us, or I'm, in a special relationship with God, therefore, you see how it develops. Should learn the lessons even from things this far back. It's interesting then that in the book of Matthew, we have Jesus telling a little story, or giving some advice, really. It's more than a story. It's advice to people. He says, and don't you think this might relate to that Cain-Abel story? If you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Right? Very profound, very beautiful advice. Even it's like your brother has something against you. Maybe you don't feel it's your fault, right? The way that the language is put, right? So maybe you don't, and it's easy to feel, well, I'm okay, I'm justified. But it's like, yeah, he has something against me. Let me go and sort that out first, and then I'll make my offering. It'll be more meaningful if you were to do that. Now, I'm going to skip a lot, but Father Moon brought out a very interesting parallel, an opportunity for restoration, and showed how, in the biblical sources at least, these opportunities are there recorded, and we see them sometimes taken advantage of, and sometimes the mistakes are repeated. And it's all there. It's like, good things and bad things. That's why it's such a precious source. So there's a later story with a similar struggle. And this involves twins, Jacob and Esau. Jacob buys a birthright from his brother. Because he's the younger of the twins and Esau is the elder. But his mother has advised him, and she got this feeling when they were both in her womb, that the elder should serve the younger, and that a great nations would come from both of them, actually. But somewhere that younger should be the center of the family, against the kind of normal practice, right? So this is actually resolving a situation which started between Adam and, in this case, Archangel Lucifer, but also Cain and Abel. It's restoring that situation. So Jacob gets a blessing from his blind father Isaac with a little bit of, trickery from his mother's help, not his own doing. His brother, when he finds out he hasn't got the blessing promised to him, is very angry and wants to kill his brother. But he does have a sense of decency. He says, I will kill you when my father has passed away. I will wait until then. So Jacob has to escape from the wrath of his brother. It means go away from the family, which is not a good solution. He goes to his mother's brother in Haran and stays there 21 years. He builds his family and his wealth. He's mistreated by his uncle Laban, and he's cheated 10 times. But probably he learns through that. This was Father Moon's insight. He learned from that the feelings that his brother had, and therefore he knew what it was. He dealt with them, and this was his strength. But then, he was ready to go and return to his brother and make peace with his brother. He struggles all night in what's described as a fight with an angel, and he goes towards his brother, and when he sees his brother coming, and he's heard that he's coming out to meet him with 400 armed warriors, so he's still angry, but nevertheless he sends gifts ahead of him, livestock, servants, children, sends them all. And as he sets eyes on his brother, he bows down 7 times, which is like really saying, you are my respected elder brother, and I want to return everything that maybe is rightfully yours and give it to you. So it's a very beautiful story that, it responds to some reading, I would think. But this is an opportunity for restoration, which Jacob works for and seizes. In a way, he does most of the work, right? And has to suffer away from his family and all these kind of resentments from his brother. But his heart is to reunite for the sake of the family and for the sake of the future. And he manages to do that. But he's fulfilling that first kind of vertical aspect of restoring that relationship with God, or foundation of faith, we call it. And then his brother is the one who overcomes that fallen nature, because he embraces his brother. He lets go of all that resentment. It just disappears. It's interesting how quickly it can disappear, actually. This is something we must remember and take heart from, because sometimes, people can be thinking this problem will never go away. It was like that with the Berlin Wall, right? We thought it would never go away. But, it just kind of collapsed because many spiritual conditions were being made behind the scene, I tell you, right? I know of some of them, but I'm sure many more were being done. So both Cain and Abel face the same, Cain and Esau, so these two stories, both face the same test. Do you follow me? Cain decides to kill his brother. It's always the murderer's way out, right? It's like, if I get rid of the other person, everything will be all right. But of course, that's never the case. It just multiplies the problem. But Esau, in this instant, comes to love his brother from God's standpoint, which is reversing that first aspect of fallen nature. He restores to him a true elder brother position, which is that second aspect, reversed. He no longer seeks to dominate unrighteously his brother. He puts all those thoughts aside. They just disappear. And he's in a position to multiply goodness, which in this case is peace and harmony in the family, right? And, they end up in a kind of love war. They're saying, oh, no, you have these things. No, you have these things. I've got enough. You have them, There's this kind of battle going on. So why I've spent a little time going into this, and I hope that's okay, is this becomes, in Father Moon's approach, for various serious things, even world-level problems, a kind of paradigm. And he refers to it many times in speeches. So way beyond its original story and that context, It became a Cain-Abel paradigm. So, and this is, to me, it's rather interesting. It starts out with this conflict where Cain kills Abel. Then, in generations later, there's a family which has twins, and the elder doesn't kill the younger, but they unite together. So that's resolving this or restoring this on a family level. Are you with me? It's some major breakthrough in terms of restoration. But we see a line that continues on. We call this kind of Abel-type view of life and a Cain-type view of life. Two ways of looking at the world. One is more faith-affirming and faith-based. One is more practical and concerned about injustices and this kind of thing. So we see a line through Abel and a line through Cain. This emerges into a kind of Cain-Abel context at the time of the birth of Jesus. This is 2,000 years ago, right? And at that time, there's little Israel has prepared itself to receive a Messiah figure, not recognizing that that person is Jesus, and still waiting for that person. But surrounding it is the big empire of Rome, which has a lot of kind of Cain-type qualities. It's very quick to violence, right? A lot of its traditions are violent traditions. It's a slave culture. But Israel, on the other hand, is much more pious, much more God-affirming in a true sense, if you compare the religions of Israel and the religions of Rome. So one is developing and expanding the kind of Cain-type view of life, and the other is expanding the Abel-type view of life. Are you with me, or have I lost everybody? It's okay? So this is now happening on a national level. And, Father Moon's interesting insight, especially because of his Christian background, it's very interesting and challenging. He said, really, at this stage, Israel should have accepted Jesus. If they'd accepted Jesus in the role of the expected Messiah, the one they were waiting for, he could have lived a long life, could have taught many important things. They would all have been written down, which they never were in his lifetime. And the nation would unite around him, and from there, people would go to other parts of the Roman Empire and make connections with people, and a lot of interesting spiritual developments which are taking place at that time. It's like the world was getting ready for some big transition 2,000 years ago. So we see that this kind of coalesces at the time of Jesus into the traditions of Hellenism, coming out of Greece and Rome, and Hebraism, coming out of the Hebrews. And so scholars will talk about these traditions, Hellenism and Hebraism. And as I said, the hope was there for Jesus to be accepted. Certain Christian view, almost like a standard view, is that Jesus came in order to die. Have you heard that?
For our sins.
Father Moon doesn't deny the efficacy of that, but saying, actually, first of all, Jesus should be received, right? So all Christian theology is a little bit like it's theology looking back, right? It happened that way, therefore it must have been, maybe it was meant to happen that way. But life isn't usually like that from my experience, So if we allow ourselves to think differently, a lot of things start to happen, including age-old barriers between Judaism and Christianity start to break down, and Christianity and Islam, which came later, start to break down because of this changed viewpoint. And historically, for me, it makes a lot of sense. That means if Jesus had had good support, primarily from John the Baptist, another key figure, which he didn't have, and his family, which he didn't have, interestingly, and that's recorded in the New Testament, if he had that support, then it could have gone to reach the leadership of Israel, the religious leaders of the time. They would have supported. And then it would have gone out to Rome, and from Rome it would have gone out even to other cultures in the time. Well, this is a huge kind of bombshell of a speculation, and I don't normally talk about it, but I felt I have to mention it today, right? This would reach the world. This is world restoration, possible even 2,000 years ago. Why? And this is in the core text of Father Moon's teaching, which is interesting, is what God was doing, he says, around the world in other parts and other cultures. In the period 400 to 600 years before Jesus was born, you have Confucius in China, you have Lao Tzu also with Taoism, you have Buddha in southern India, you have Zoroaster in Persia, you have transformation in Indian culture through the Upanishads, you have some kind of a Reformation movement going on in Judaism to bring it back to its roots through Malachi, 400 years before Jesus. You have Socrates in Greece, that Father Moon always thought of as a great religious leader, not normally thought of that way, but for his qualities and for his contribution to civilization, is really up there as a thinker and a person who was, as you know, willing to sacrifice his life on trumped-up charges of leading young people astray, right? So these figures were all alive, active, making their own foundation in different cultures, different languages, unconnected from each other, right? But that's all happening. It's like the world is getting ready. And the thing that is common is, it's brought out by one academic, a British academic, Karen Armstrong, very wonderful writer. She said, as far as these sages, and that's referring to those leaders of religion at that time, as far as these sages were concerned, respect for the sacred rights of all human beings was religion. That was their religion. If people behaved with kindness and generosity to their fellows, they could save the world. Wow. And then she goes on to say, bringing it forward to today, we need to rediscover this ethos. We must learn to live and behave as though people in countries remote from our own are as important as ourselves. Wow. A great thinker, a great soul. She spent certain time in different religious traditions herself, immersing herself in Islam, in Buddhism, in Hinduism, these world religions. Very amazing person. But interestingly, is not the first person to notice this was a time of great transformation. She calls her book The Great Transformation, referring to this Karl Jaspers, a German historian, called the axial period. So what Father Moon is saying here is there was an opportunity 2,000 years ago that wasn't realized. And that's why we've had a prolongation of trouble and suffering and difficulties and wars and conflicts over the last 2,000 years, right? Christianity talks about bringing in God's kingdom, but have you seen it in this world? No, we're still stuck. And interestingly, those traditions are largely, they continue, rather than coming together at that time, those traditions have continued on separately over this last 2,000 years. So they're separate. That's one reason why interreligious work is so important and why UPF is doing that. Because in this, we're coming to another opportunity, right, to bring all these things together, and that will happen. I tell you, it will happen. This is the work, in Christianity they call it like a second coming or this kind of idea, but different people have different expectations. It's all about the same kind of transformation which is going to happen. So here we have the fruit of Cain type thinking, and here is the kind of fruit of Abel type thinking. So that is why almost any situation that you meet today seems to have two opposing camps. Have you noticed that? It's a bit strange, isn't it, right? Even our parliament is designed that way. It has two sets of opposing seats, right? Because any issue wants to be debated. Some are for and some are against, right? So it's different views of life, actually. One tends to be more Cain-like, more materialistic, more prone to violence. One tends to be more faith-affirming, but not always, and tends to put value on the individual in a little stronger way. So you get these kind of, why I said it was a paradigm or typology. in Father Moon's teaching is like, yes, well, there was Cain and Abel, and we said they need to, Cain needs to come through his brother to be united and centered on a common purpose and a good purpose. But in a way, this is our legacy. This is us with fallen nature, our body and mind. It's like body is Cain and mind is Abel, right? And they're fighting with each other, right? So what does the body has to come under the mind? And sometimes religion has been described as the way to have the body obey the mind. And some are very good at that, right? Some are very good at getting to the roots of the mind problem. Buddhism is particularly good on that because, it's worth exploring for that benefit alone. And I don't think it excludes your other beliefs at all, right? It's just very interesting how it's centered on that. And certain traditions, so obviously not just believing certain things. That's in a way neither here nor there. What is important is disciplining the body and having it come under the mind and elevating the mind. It's going through the same process. So we need to study more and pray more and have the body. This is why religions almost all will do things like prayer and fasting. Fasting is denying the body. And people find when they go through a period of fasting, the mind becomes clearer. And they have more strength and more will to do what they want to do. Or they see a solution which they didn't see before to some problem. So it's a way of, using this principle. So any devotee needs to find any guru, I just use these terms, right, for their kind of way to a more elevated future, truth-filled and love-filled future, right? So this is why religions tend to have one person at the center, be it prophet or guru or messiah or somebody that's there, right? Tends to be a man. In unificationism, we say it needs to be a couple, interestingly, but that fits in with the whole blessing theology which I mentioned. Then you can say, well, communism, to still use these terms, especially in the 20th century, is the fruit of that Cain-type view of life. And democracy is the fruit of the Abel-type view of life, which is why when democracy is tied into its kind of especially Christian roots in Europe, it's good. But if it abandons those, it's as open to self-centered abuse and exploitation and greed as anything else, right? So communism, in a way, the best of that needs to come through the best of democracy to make a kind of unified, new tradition. Any issue has some Cain-type view. Any issue has some Abel-type view. As a RE teacher at school, I know I had to present this to teenagers, like abortion or euthanasia, all these kind of things, right? Ethical conundrums, right? But you'll see these two sides to everything. One is more Cain-type. That doesn't mean evil and good. Don't shorthand me on this one. It's not one side is evil, one side is good. No, both are mixtures of good and evil. But somewhere, one is in this more Cain-type tradition and needs to let go of certain things. And Abel also has responsibilities. Wow. How are we doing? Everybody all right? Let me jump just to think about, because I mentioned this idea of someone coming or some kind of, it's interesting that most religious traditions have the idea of return of their founder or of a Imam Mahdi or of a true man coming in Confucianism or of a Saoshyant in Zoroastrianism. They have this idea that everything is kind of going to come to a good conclusion when someone returns. This is Buddhism. I thought it was fairly neutral to choose, right? But I like this. I like the way it's worded. This is the Sutra of the Great Accomplishment of the Maitreya Buddha. It's like a second coming of Buddha. Listen attentively with one heart, a man whose spirit shines brightly, a man whose mind is completely unified, a man whose virtue excels everyone. Such a man will truly appear in this world. When he preaches precious laws, all the people will totally be satisfied, as if The thirsty drink sweet drops of rain from heaven, and each and every one will attain the path of liberation from struggles. How do you like that? Isn't it amazing? Right, so there was a way to jump. You have to excuse me, I'm going to miss out certain slides, but just for cause of time, even so, as we're well aware, there are remaining conflicts coming, and when we majorly or externally solve the problem of the Cain-Abel division of communism and democracy, still there are surfacing problems around the world involving races or nationalities or religions, and we're living through this time at the moment. And the only positive take, I suppose, is that I think things can be solved quicker than they could in the past, when these things arise. So let's end today with some, from my part, we still have a talk from Mr. Robin Marsh, but with some hope-giving quotations. How would you like that? This is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He said, "We must discover the power of love, the redemptive power of love." That's interesting. It's kind of putting things right, this kind of power. And when we discover that, we will be able to make of this old world a new world. We will be able to make men better. Love is the only way. He also said here, we never get rid of an enemy by meeting hate with hate. We get rid of an enemy by getting rid of enmity. Wow. And it wouldn't be right to conclude without words from founder of UPF. And he said this, "I'm teaching you to love those who hate you. If you love them, sooner or later they will come to like you. If you return good 3 times for every time someone does you wrong, eventually that person will bow his head. Try it yourself and see if I'm right or not. Everyone has a conscience."
Amen.
Leave you with that thought.
Lovely.
Thank you very much, everybody. God bless you, and appreciate it so much.